Kwanzaa. Today we're going to be going over the truth about Kwanzaa and some things you may have not known about this holiday. Now, Kwanzaa is said to be the celebration of African American culture and African culture, unity, and heritage, and is supposed to promote these things during this time. It is typically a festival that is held for 7 days from December 26th all the way up until January 1st, and it also commemorates the lighting of the Kinara candles, as you see right here. It also culminates in a communal feast that is known as Karamu, which is typically held on the 6th day of Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is also held to promote Pan-Africanism, as you can see right here with the Pan-Africanism colors red, green, and black. Dr. Maulana Karenga is said to be the founder of Kwanzaa back in 1966, who is a professor of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach, and who is also the executive director of African American Cultural Center. Now, Kwanzaa was said to be founded during the aftermath of the Watts riots that occurred in Los Angeles during the summer of 1965, and Dr. Maulana Karenga had the goal of Kwanzaa, quote, to give blacks an alternative to the existing holidays such as Christmas and also Hanukkah, but it was also done to give blacks an opportunity to celebrate themselves and their history, unquote. Now, there are 7 basic principles of Kwanzaa that also correspond to the 7 candles or the Kinara candles, as you can see right here. The 7 listed are Umoja, which is listed in the Swahili, which means unity and has to do with unity and togetherness. There's also Kujichaguila, and forgive me if I'm butchering the pronunciations, which means self-determination, Ujima, which means collective work, Ujama, which means cooperative economics, Nia, which means purpose, Kumba for creativity, and also Imani for faith. And these are the 7 basic principles that are said to make up Kwanzaa as a whole that is celebrated for 7 days. But what if I told you that Kwanzaa is actually a perversion of the appointed times in the scripture? What if I told you that Kwanzaa is subliminally telling you about your culture if you're so-called African American or so-called of African diaspora that is listening to this video right now? What if I told you that you had your own festivals for thousands of years, well before 1966? Because remember, Kwanzaa is not even 60 years old. What if I told you that the candles that you are looking at actually derive from festivals of your own heritage that are thousands of years old? What am I talking about, you may be wondering? Isn't it interesting how Kwanzaa has 7 different candles that are to be observed that symbolize what we just talked about and went over with the 7 principles of Kwanzaa? But is it a surprise or a coincidence how there are 7 candles, 3 of them right here are green, 3 over here are red, and the middle one just so happens to be black? Where else do you see this type of arrangement with 7 candles? That's right, the 7-branch menorah that is outlined in Shamuth or Exodus chapter 25 verses 31 through 40, and also Bamadabar, the book of Numbers chapter 8. There are 7 appointed times that are listed in scripture according to Uyakra or the book of Leviticus chapter 23. Now, in case you're wondering, the scriptural appointed times, there are 7 of them which symbolize the 7-branch menorah as we talked about in Shamuth or Exodus chapter 25 that we showed you earlier. The 7 appointed times or scriptural appointed times are Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, as it's incorrectly known. It's more correctly known as the Harvest Festival. And if you would like to take a look at our video covering more on the Harvest Festival, you can definitely do so, as it will be linked in the description box below. But then you have the fall appointed times, which are trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacles. Now, you've been lied to and you've been told that only the Jewish are supposed to celebrate these appointed times. You've been lied to and told that it's only for the Jewish when it comes to Passover and when it comes to Sukkot, or commonly known as tabernacles. However, what you have to understand is that the Jewish lied to you. They lied to you about your culture. They stole your culture and identity from you if you're so-called African American or so-called Negro or so-called African descent. They stole your history, heritage, identity, and culture from you and gave you the perverted one of Kwanzaa today. Because these 7 appointed times are your history, these 7 appointed times are your culture, these 7 appointed times that you see listed right here are your history, heritage, and culture and identity, and not Kwanzaa, and have been celebrated for thousands of years. And your ancestors, such as Musha, or as you know him today by Moses, on down, have celebrated these appointed times for thousands and thousands of years. And even the Messiah, who looks just like you, by the way, whom the world ignorantly refers to as JC, he also celebrated these appointed times, and there are scriptural accounts of him celebrating the Passover with his taught ones, or commonly known as disciples, and he also celebrated tabernacles as well. That's listed in the scripture, and you can find the scriptural verses that also prove this as well. But did you know that the Messiah of the scripture, did you know that he looks exactly like you? Did you know the scripture refers to him being dark-skinned? And yes, this is a scriptural fact. Did you know that he observed these appointed times as well? And this is what you are supposed to be doing and not observing Kwanzaa? Because Kwanzaa is a tradition, and the Messiah speaks against traditions in the scripture, including traditions such as Christmas as well. And we've already done a video covering Christmas and why we are not to celebrate that either. Now, it's interesting how Kwanzaa goes all the way until January 1st, which is said to be the new year. But what if I told you that the real new year actually begins in the spring? Now, what's also interesting is the fact how the word Kwanzaa derives from the Swahili quote, Matunda ya Kwanzaa, which means first fruits. Well, isn't it just so happened that one of the 7 appointed times of scripture is known as the first fruits, and the word Kwanzaa just so happens to mean first fruits? What are they subliminally trying to tell you about Kwanzaa? When you look at the Kinara candles and when you light these candles, are they subliminally telling you about your culture and heritage that was discontinued from you by your creator because your ancestors did not keep the law, statutes, and commandments, and because of that had to endure the plagues and punishments of Deuteronomy chapter 28? Because you can take a look at our video, Who Are the Real Biblical Israelites, and you will see that they are so-called African Americans or dark skinned. They are not the Jewish, because the Jewish are the synagogues of Satan, and they do lie according to scripture. When you look at scripture for so-called Africans or African Americans, you will see that the scripture is a history book about you. It is not a religious book about Jewish people, nor is it a religious book about Christian people, but it is a scriptural book about the YAHUDIA, or commonly known today as the Hebrew people, who are the ancient Hebrew people, who are the so-called African Americans who have been scattered throughout the 4 corners of the earth today. And we know scripture says that the creator would discontinue his heritage with his people because of their disobedience, but then in the end times that his people would wake up to who they truly are and embrace their true culture. So when you look at the Kwanzaa culture, when you look at these 7 candles, you see that it is very similar to the 7-branch menorah, which is your ancient history and your ancient culture. Now, it's interesting because when you take a look at the Kinara candles, they resemble quite well the 7-branch menorah candles as well. And we know according to scripture that things go from right to left. So you have the spring appointed times, which are Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits as well. They all occurred in the spring, and we've talked about this in previous videos, how the Messiah of the New Testament came to fulfill the appointed times because he died on Passover, was buried during unleavened bread in order to become the first fruits, and these appointed times all occur in the spring. You then have the summer appointed time, which is the harvest festival itself, commonly known today as the Pentecost, and then you have the fall fall appointed times that have yet to be fulfilled, which are trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. And if you would like to learn more about these appointed times, you can definitely do so, as we will leave helpful links in the description box below so that you can learn about your true identity and learn about your true culture and get away from these holidays, Kwanzaa included. Because your ancestors celebrated appointed times beforehand. Your ancestors and your true history, heritage, identity, and culture is outlined in what's commonly known today as the Bible or the scriptures. That is where your history and heritage is outlined, not from a man-made traditional holiday that began back in the 1960s. But your festivals are thousands of years old, and you see that Kwanzaa is subliminally telling you about your appointed times. Again, just like you see right here with the lit 7-branch menorah right here. And by the way, the one that is used for Hanukkah is a pagan one and is a perversion of our appointed times. Once again, the 9-branch menorah is an abomination and is not to be used whatsoever, but is used for Hanukkah by the Jewish because they added and took away from our appointed times and created their own traditions, but is not to be used at all. But as you can see right here, the 7-branch menorah is scriptural and symbolizes the 7 appointed times: Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits that are celebrated in the spring, and then the harvest festival, or commonly known today as Pentecost, that is celebrated in the summer, and then trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles, the appointed times, the 3 of them, that are celebrated in the fall. But you see right here how it's very similar to these candles right here, the Kinara candles. Again, subliminally letting you know that you do have a history, heritage, and culture. Subliminally letting you know that your history, heritage, and culture is thousands of years old and not man-made. Subliminally letting you know that your history, heritage, and culture and identity is contained in the scriptures indeed, and not contained by what man and by what your enemies have told you and spoon-fed lies to you for thousands and thousands of years. So the next time you decide to celebrate Kwanzaa, or the next time you decide to light the Kinara candles, you will know exactly what they mean and exactly where they stem from, because they stem from your history, heritage, culture, and identity that is outlined in the scriptures. Along with the scriptural appointed times, your appointed times, which are your real, true history, heritage, and culture and identity, the real truth about who you really are. And if you would like to learn more, you can definitely do so with the videos and links provided in the description box, as well as the cards. This is Truth Unveiled here, saying as always, Shalom.